and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen, and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us.
All right, we're on Chapter 19, Understanding Responsibility. And you've got a little story to preface this chapter with.
Yeah, I had some fun with this one, Toni. When I was thinking about writing this article on understanding responsibility, I was reminded of an actual experience that I had one dark and stormy night, which it really was. Uh-huh. And I was driving home from work, and my car flooded out because the water was so deep, and so I had to go to a service station and get someone to let me borrow a battery and jumper cables, and the service station attendant was nice to come to where I was flooded out and to help me get it all hooked up, and but I was frustrated and eager to get home, and I was soaked to the skin, and so I was in a hurry to get the battery cables hooked up to the temporary battery, and I hooked the wires up to the wrong posts and asked the service station attendant to start the car, and he did, and the battery just boom,
oh my gosh.
It exploded. and so when I was getting ready to write this chapter, I thought of that experience about getting our wires crossed, as I did on that battery, with the predictable and inevitable consequences of it blew the battery up. And so I got to thinking about how so much of life's problems that we have is related to a very similar dynamic of getting what I call our responsibility wires crossed. And that's what motivated me to include that story as an introduction to the chapter, because this is a short little 4-page chapter, but one that is packed with important principles that many people either do not know about or that they daily violate, and it's a source of many pains and difficulties in our lives personally and in our relationships.
Well, let's talk about how we get our wires twisted. You say that we're conditioned by our society to, number one, assume that others are responsible for what we feel and do. And then number two, we assume responsibility for the actions and attitudes of other people. And there's, you can almost see, yep. The wires are crossed.
Right.
You know, I'm crossing my arms right now because that's the way I feel. Like it feels, and it feels terrible, but we're taught to think that this is the way we do things.
Exactly. Under these two major principles or beliefs that we're taught is that you are responsible for me, the first one, and secondly, I'm responsible for you. Then we have two subcategories under that, which simplifies this chapter a lot and makes it very straightforward. And I think hopefully easy to understand. And that is, there are two ways that we are taught that other people are responsible for us, and that is, we're taught to blame others for our thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And we are also taught to give other people the credit for our own achievements. So here again, it's a double whammy getting our wires crossed, is that we're taught to blame others for what we do, and then we're taught to give other people credit for what we do, and neither of which is appropriate.
You have some examples here of the way we blame others. I'm sure there are just an infinite number, but let me just read a couple of them, maybe two or three. You say, I had no choice in the matter. They made me do it. And,
Right.
and you think of that might be a child saying that, but that's anybody, adult or child,
Oh, yeah.
You also say, I couldn't help myself. He was such a good salesman. That is a big one.
Yes.
Or my boss is always making me feel so incompetent. So, yeah.
Or we often say laughingly that the devil made me do it. Or I had to do it because God says I have to do it, that kind of thing. So we often get twisted up theology in this section here of blaming others. We blame God or bad luck or even the devil himself, or whatever that means to that particular person.
Right.
So it's not just people that we blame, but it's superpowers.
But you say here in the real world, even though we might hear or say these things, but it doesn't really work in the real world. It's not a healthy way to be functioning.
That's true. It really doesn't work in the real world for two reasons. Number one, any person with half a brain can see through that real quickly, and we don't have any credibility with anybody who thinks rationally and is a mature adult, that we're blaming others or circumstances or luck for what we choose to do ourselves. And so that doesn't help in our business or personal relationships to blame others. But also, in addition, it doesn't work in the sense that we set ourselves up to feel like victims. When we're blaming other people, then we see ourselves as victims of all of these other sources outside ourselves, and that creates that sense of helplessness and hopelessness and anxiety. So it doesn't help us to blame others, because then we feel weak and out of control of our lives.
It's totally disempowering.
It is.
We're not being responsible for our own actions in our lives.
So it has some definite downsides to it.
And, I like what you say, those who do agree with us are not the kind of people who can bring anything positive to our lives anyway. So, you might surround yourself with people who will support you in that blaming, but really, is that what we want?
Yeah, because the people who agree with you that you're a victim, then they usually will see themselves as victims as well, and they're blamers. And those people do not add anything positive to our lives as well, so we don't need them in our lives. So there are no real benefits to ourselves or other people or to relationships to blame others for our behaviors.
And you say at the end of this little section, inevitably we become bitter, anxious, and depressed if we use this kind of functioning. And that makes a lot of sense, because either it's always somebody else's fault and you can get in that mindset and be a complete victim, or you're trying to hide the truth, and that can create a lot of anxiety.
Yes, it is. But primarily the anxiety comes from that helpless feeling. See, if I truly believe in my mind that I'm out of control of my life and I don't have any choice in the matter, and the world happens to me rather than my functioning responsibly in the world, then we feel that helpless, hopeless state. And as a victim, and victims are always going to have a lot of anxiety because they don't, here again, they're not empowered.
They're just at the mercy of the wind. Wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to the B section of this. You take the credit. And let me just read a few of these examples, these quotes. I would be nothing without her in my life. I owe everything I am today to my parents, coaches, and teachers. I could never have gotten a decent job on my own. I mean, again, it's the same idea. You're not taking responsibility.
In a positive way,
Right.
Here again, you're disempowering yourself through this false sense of humility. Oh, I'd be nothing without you, or no, I didn't do anything. You did all the work, when in fact that's not true. But we think that endears us to people, and it does to dysfunctional people, that they want you to give them all the credit.
Right.
And again, they're not the kind of people that you should want in your life anyway. If they want you to give them all the credit for what you've accomplished in your life, they don't celebrate your own accomplishments, and so that doesn't make any sense to have these people in your lives. But it is disempowering to give other people the credit. But if they do it out of this false sense of humility, or fear that I'm going to look selfish or conceited, or
perhaps could it be also a feeling of self-worth or self-loathing?
Yes.
You don't deserve the credit?
Oh, absolutely. It could be.
Even if you've done all the work.
Right, exactly. So these are the two examples of making other people responsible for, or taking responsibility for other people. This one is when you make other people responsible for yourself.
Right.
Is that you're to blame for my bad behavior, and you get the credit for my good behavior. And now we move to the next one. I'm responsible for you, and it has the two similar divisions under that.
I take the blame and I take the credit. So I'm taking it all as opposed to pushing it away. What a burden.
It's a heavy burden.
Yeah.
Won't you read some of these examples of I take the blame?
I certainly will. And I want to start, you talk about how parents can start this very early. You say it up in the very first paragraph. It is not uncommon, for instance, when a child is demeaned or punished by some adult or even by another child, for that child's parents to immediately ask, what did you do to make him or her angry? Children are often blamed for what their siblings or other playmates do. Some are made to feel responsible even when loved ones die or parents divorce. And we see that a lot in our media. Because I think, they know when they're putting that together, this is a serious problem. Parents are very good at starting this early.
And they do it so innocuously, and they often out of ignorance. When a parent will say, for instance, to a 3-year-old child, you kids are just driving me crazy. And children's minds are very literal. So they don't know not to take that literally. And so the child feels very guilty and ashamed for making mommy or daddy go crazy or feel frustrated or angry. So just those little so-called innocent statements really blame children for what they're not responsible for at all, and they grow up with that programmed inside their brain.
Yeah, and some of these statements that we might hear from those programmed people would be, quote, if I had just given him one more chance, I know he would have straightened out. Or, I just can't say no to them. I'm so afraid of hurting them. If I had only been a better wife or a better husband, son, a Christian, God would not have taken him. We even take responsibility for somebody's death.
A lot of people feel that way. And a classic example is when, like a teenager, being an emotional, out of control, typical teenager, might say to a parent, I just hate you, I just wish you were dead. And then the parent gets sick and has to go to the hospital, or they're in a car accident, and then that child is burdened with that sense of shame and guilt because they feel that children feel omnipotent anyway. They feel very, very powerful in one way and very powerless in other ways, which is another completely different discussion. But they feel responsible for what they say, even in the heat of an argument, and so they may carry that guilt or shame the rest of their lives, and no one will know about it because of a typical teenager outburst to a parent. But then they hold themselves accountable for what happens. It's called magical thinking.
Wow. What a burden to carry with you.
It is.
Let me read this little last paragraph. These and countless other statements which place responsibility for others on our shoulders create a heavy burden of guilt, which we cannot and should not carry. People are going to feel and act, often inappropriately, however they choose to, and if we think we are responsible for them, we will blame and criticize ourselves, even when we are not actually at fault. Wow.
And the correct word for that, by the way, is not guilt, it's shame. Shame, there are two kinds of shame. One is the belief that for any number of reasons, usually some form of abuse early in childhood, that they are worthless and unlovable and just no good pieces of garbage. Now this is what we call core shame. We feel like we're rotten to the core, like a rotten apple. There's nothing good about us. So that's core shame, a sense of worthlessness. Another kind of shame is a false sense of guilt. I believe I have done something wrong. It's action-based, not just existence-based. Core shame is existence-based. But behavioral shame is I believe I have actually done something wrong when in fact we have not done anything wrong. Here again, we're blaming ourselves for something that's not our fault. So that's not called guilt, that's called shame. And roughly speaking, research has indicated that about 75% of what people feel guilty about, they're not guilty of at all.
You're kidding.
There's very little real guilt
Wow.
in the world. Most of it is a sense of shame. One of those two kinds of shame.
That's enlightening. Wow. Let's go to the B part. I take the credit. And you say, not only do we often take the blame for other people, but we can also give ourselves the credit for what they do in our lives. It makes us feel important to that person, indispensable even. Wow. That's kind of inflated. Is that a form of inflated ego?
In many cases, it is. A lot of times, it's more of a need for a sense of control and power.
I see.
Not of I am better than you are, inflated ego. But sometimes that is true, definitely. But a lot of times, it's the need to feel powerful, and so they take credit where credit is not due.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you use this example here, and that totally makes sense about children who need to feel powerful. They believe that if they are the perfect child, they're going to be the perfect child, so mommy and daddy think of them in a better way. So they're constantly trying to better themselves and take the credit for things. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes. Children, like I said a few minutes ago earlier about a completely different conversation, children and childlike people, even though they may be chronologically adults, they still think like children. They feel very, very helpless, and they want to feel the opposite of that. They need to feel powerful, that they have some control over their lives, and so they unconsciously, and I do believe is an unconscious decision, to feel powerful. And this is the source of perfectionism, is that they're taught that, here again, they feel shame about themselves because of how they basically have been treated, either by parents or parenting figures, as they're growing up. And so they feel a sense of worthlessness or lovelessness, it's called. I feel unlovable. And so I don't like that feeling, because to a child, if they're not loved, they're going to be abandoned. And to a child, that's the worst fear that you can have, because if a child is abandoned, that child dies, literally. It's a life and death fear for a child. And so they feel like they need to feel they have the power to make their parents love them, or to make other people love them. And so they adopt this sense of, if I can just be perfect, I can get them to love me. I have power over whether someone loves me or not. I can make them love me by making sure there's nothing about me that is unlovable, that is unacceptable. So I will be the perfect child, or the perfect employee, or the perfect spouse, or the perfect friend, or the perfect Christian, whatever, or the perfect Jew. I'll do everything right, and then they will have to love me. They won't have anything to reject about me, because I'm perfect. And that's the source of perfectionism. And I've used to tell my clients all the time, perfectionism is all about trying to fix what ain't broke. You know, and that's what perfectionism is about. Is there something about me that makes me unlovable, but I can fix that by being perfect, and then they'll have to love me. So it's that inflated sense of power that people need to feel, so they don't have to feel afraid of being rejected.
Gosh, you know, I'm sitting here thinking back all the way to 7th grade, middle school, you know, junior high, and you start seeing that in a very big way. It's almost like the garden blossoms in a bad way, because you see all the student population starts to divide. You get the people who are rising stars, you know, they're the cheerleaders, they're the quarterbacks, and they sit at a separate table from everybody else, and they wear the cool clothes. And I was telling a friend recently, I think even this week, that I remember looking back at my middle school yearbook and going, well, we all look like nerds. Even the cheerleaders and the quarterbacks, they look like nerds. How is it that these people were these upper echelon of 7th and 8th grade, and it wasn't so much what we looked like, it was the attitudes that were brought to it, and trying to be more above everybody else.
Everybody is jockeying for a position to be liked.
Yeah.
For that very reason, they don't want to be rejected, and so therefore they try to be perfect.
And we're talking ages 12 and 13 back then, and I'm sure it's earlier now.
And when you look at people's behavior as so-called adults, most people, it's been my experience, never grow out of middle school. Mm-hmm. They get stuck in middle school mentality, and they spend the rest of their lives trying to accumulate wealth, power, influence, beauty, mm-hmm. Fame, popularity, and it goes on till the day they die. And that's what all the dysfunctionality of the world is all about, is trying to make sure someone loves them.
And I was just about to say, that's just crazy.
It is crazy.
And it is crazy.
It's teenage craziness.
Yes. You say there's another little branch to this. You say another advantage of assuming credit for what others do or feel is the hope that they too may believe we have the power over their happiness or well-being. So it's not only raising ourselves up in perfectionism, but having the power to do this in somebody else I don't know, that sounds a little, it could really mess with you if you think you've got the power to make somebody else happy.
And that's another flip side of another coin. It's very, very common to, and by the way, as you were reading that paragraph, if the reader is reading along, they will note that the word advantage is in quotation marks.
Yes.
It's not a real advantage, it's a presumed advantage. For example, if a couple is thinking about, or one person in the couple particularly is thinking about ending the relationship, mm-hmm. and the person who does not want the relationship to end may come up with something like, and this is almost invariable in breakups, mm-hmm. that one person will say, "You can't leave me. Nobody will ever love you the way I love you." Or another one is, "You can't make it in the world without me." So they make themselves powerful and responsible for the other person's well-being and happiness to create a codependent bond with that other person, so that other person does not abandon them. They say, "You can't make it without me," in some form or fashion. So it's an ideal example of, I'm responsible for your well-being and you better not forget it.
Yeah, and if you're a healthy person, you can feel that right away. But if you're not, and you don't understand this, and your wires are crossed, man, that could deflate you and make you almost impotent.
Oh yeah, and you feel like a slave to the situation. Is, I can't leave this person because what if they're right? What if nobody else will have me? And it's a powerful influence on one's self-esteem and on how they choose to live their life.
And you have a couple of others here. It says, quote, "I made you what you are and don't you forget it." Or, "We've given you everything. The least you could do is go to the right college." I mean, talk about slavery.
It's a form of slavery.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Or the other ones, "If you'll marry me, I'll make you happy beyond your wildest dreams." Or, "Trust me, I know what's best for you." All of these are examples of wanting to feel powerful and in control of someone else. And basically, so you want to be abandoned by the other person, so you turn the tables on them and say, "You can't abandon me because your life will be worthless without me." When in fact the message is, "You don't dare leave me because my life will be worthless without you."
Right.
It's getting your wires crossed, but making it appear like I'm doing you the favor by being in your life, when in fact it's the fear of rejection within oneself.
And you talk about how often this controlling manipulation is using the motives of love, better insight, or only trying to help. So they're really getting you at a core vulnerability. Because usually in these situations, these are vulnerable situations in which one is dealing with anyway. So when you hear that, you probably feel unsafe. You think it makes you self-doubt. I don't know, maybe nobody ever will love me. You know, I don't know that I can make it in the world and never have. So I can see how it's an incredibly penetrating form of manipulation.
And it really is. And a fellow by the name of Steiner, Claude Steiner, many years ago wrote a great book, one of my favorites, called Scripts People Live. He says that people are scripted in certain ways, 4 ways particularly, but 3 most important ways in my opinion, and that is basic training in powerlessness, basic training in lovelessness, and basic training in mindlessness. And so we're conditioned by our elders, so to speak, the people who raise us, to believe that we're not lovable. That's basic training in lovelessness, which here again is intended either deliberately or subconsciously to say you're not lovable, but I'll put up with you anyway, so you better not leave me because nobody else will love someone like you. And so it creates that dependency bond. Same thing with a sense of powerlessness. Here, I'll do that for you. You can't do that. And so we keep doing things for other people and rescuing them from the need to grow and experience their own failures and successes. And so we make them dependent on us to say, you can't make it in the world without me because I have to do everything for you. Here again, that's dependent people trying to make the other person dependent on them. And the same thing with mindlessness. You don't know anything. I know better what's good for you and what you should believe and what's right and wrong. And you can't think for yourself, so therefore you have to stay with me and let me do my thinking for you. You're thinking for you, therefore you won't leave me.
Right.
They're all subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways that people try to bond others to them so they won't be abandoned. And so we program children to feel like they're unlovable, they can't think for themselves, and they cannot do for themselves, and therefore you have to stay with me and depend on me to take care of you, you stupid little unlovable, powerless, helpless child. And therefore, way down deep inside it says, now they won't leave me because they have to have me in their lives. It's a very powerful programming to people. You see it every day.
Man, oh man, talk about being tethered.
Oh, it is.
Well, let's talk about what really our responsibilities are and unlatching the crossed wires. Let's get them in the right place. So talk to us about what the truth really is and what we ourselves are responsible for.
And this is where it really gets very important, Toni. I mentioned 3 critical requirements for practicing the responsibility wires being straight in order for that to work. And I'll explain that as I go along. Why don't you just read those 3 requirements and then I'll explain them a little bit.
Well, I like what you have. It summarizes in the very first sentence in italics. You say, we are responsible only for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. So number 1 is each of us is responsible for evaluating our motives for what we say and do, so that our behavior is intended to help and not hurt. And this, yet again, goes back to one of the earliest chapters in communication. What is our message? What is our motive? What is our intention? And we better think it through before we speak, right?
Yes.
Number 2 is we must communicate our intentions clearly to those who will be affected by our words and actions. We must not assume that another person knows what our motives are without our telling him or her. Again, we've talked about this before. And number 3, We must learn to act in ways that are consistent with our intentions and that are likely to achieve those outcomes. Our words and our behaviors need to send a congruent message. So motives, communicate, act.
Those are the three requirements, and they're very, very important. Irresponsible people will take advantage of this chapter, so to speak, by harmful intentions, poor communication of what those intentions are, and also harmful, uncaring, insensitive, even abusive behaviors toward others, but then they will hide behind this basic principle of responsibility by treating other people however they want to treat them. Inappropriate behaviors, harmful behaviors, unloving and uncaring behaviors, but when that other person is hurt because of that, is offended and feels anxious and angry, and it damages the relationship, then this person can irresponsibly use one of these this principle here is that, well, I'm not responsible for how you feel. It's like I could walk up to someone and slap them in the face, and they say, "Oh, well, that hurt. Why did you do that? That's not nice." And I could say, "Well, I'm not responsible for how you feel. I just felt like slapping you, and if that hurt, it's not my fault. That's your fault." But we can do the same thing by our actions and our words and our intentions. We can do harmful, abusive things to people, and then try to get ourselves off the hook by saying, "Oh, well, if you're hurt by that, that's your problem. I'm not responsible for how you feel." Mm-hmm. And that's totally irresponsible and cruel to do that. So that's what these three requirements are all about, is that we are responsible for what we intend to accomplish. We are responsible for communicating our good intentions, should they be good, and they should always be good. And we are responsible for our behaviors toward other people. So we can't let ourselves off the hook by abusing people and then saying, "Well, I'm not responsible for how you react to that." Mm-hmm. So if that hurts your feelings or something, no big deal. That's your fault.
Well, even, we have that saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And that's just not true.
That's just pure crazy. That's irresponsible.
Yeah, but it's in our culture.
I know it.
You hear that as a little kid.
I know it. So it's a fine tightrope that we have to walk in this area of responsibility, because, ultimately there is an element of truth to that truism. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. So we have to ultimately get to the idea is that, that they can hurt, they can damage and destroy a relationship through no fault of our own because of the bad behavior of someone else, but how we feel about ourselves and how we react or respond to someone else's bad behavior, we are responsible for. Mm-hmm. We don't want to ever set up someone else as our ultimate authority on how we feel about ourselves or how we respond to it. The old bit about, well, you have to fight fire with fire. Well, in a forest fire, that is true, but in human relationships, that doesn't always apply, because someone can mistreat us, but that does not justify our coming back and mistreating someone else and being cruel to them just because they've been cruel to us. Nor do we have to feel bad about ourselves just because someone else has shamed us or said bad things about us. We're still responsible for how we feel about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's a tightrope situation in there. So there's an element of truth to that truism, but we can't carry it to the extreme.
I have a question for you. You say on this, toward the end, there's no way that one person can prove to another what his or her intentions are, so arguing over motives is fruitless and usually destructive. But somebody might say, well, I have good intentions, but their communication and their actions are not backing that up. And so you can't prove that their intentions were not good.
And they can't prove they were.
Exactly. But you find yourself, and I think in today's world with the lack of good communication skills and very little thought on good intentions and actions, how do we deal with situations when we are feeling attacked or hurt or something, and somebody says, but I didn't, that wasn't my intention, but nothing was backing that up? What do we do in that situation?
Well, that's an excellent question. When you say what we do, that means that when we're the recipient
Yes.
of inappropriate behavior,
Yes.
what we think is
and
inappropriate.
they're saying my intentions were not that.
Well, it's important to, like I said earlier, don't argue intentions by saying to someone says, well, I think you're lying. I think you meant to hurt me. I think you meant to insult me. Because that's a no-win situation.
Right.
Neither person can prove intentions. So what you do, instead of focusing on arguing intentions, you speak about actions by saying something like, well, I'm not going to argue with you about what your intentions were. Only you know what they were. And if your intentions were good, then from my perspective as a recipient of your behavior did not indicate that that was your intention. That might have been just my perception or whatever, but I'm not going to argue with you about what your intention was. I'm saying I didn't like your behavior and I want you to stop it.
Right.
And don't do that again.
Right.
Because that's not helpful to me and not helpful to our relationship. So you ignore the issue of intention. I didn't mean to hurt you. You say, well, what you meant to do is not my business. That's your business. I'm telling you, I don't like that behavior, and would you please stop it?
And so we, as on the other end of it, our real focus is to get that all in line. Intention, how we communicate, and how we act on it. Then there's not that confusion
Or power struggles.
Yes.
So you focus on the actions ultimately, and don't argue intentions. It's a useless battle.
And so I like what you say. The very last sentence you say, any relationship works better when we take complete responsibility for ourselves and ask our partner to do the same.
Yes.
And that's important. And if we're not asking the people around us to do the same thing, then you just might as well walk away, because you can't really work together if intentions are not clear, communication is not clear, actions are not clear.
That is true, and if they're not consistent with each other. And of course, like is true in all of the chapters in this book, in all of life, is that in all relationships, business or personal, both people have to know about this information, and they have to be willing to practice it for it to work in any relationship. It's good for one person to learn all these skills and principles, including the principles related to being responsible. But if the other person is not a responsible person and they are blamers, or they're victims, or they do not practice these principles, the relationship is not going to work smoothly.
Right.
And so you have to question seriously whether being in that relationship is worth enough to you that you're willing to pay the price by engaging with an irresponsible person.
And all you can do is ask and see whether they're willing.
Exactly. So here again, you cannot assume that you have power to change someone else just because you know and practice these principles. The other person has to know and practice them as well, or you have a mismatch there that's just not going to work.
Well, and it comes right back, and I mentioned earlier when we were talking about this, about the serenity prayer. That in itself is a perfect example of what we are responsible for and what we aren't. We're not responsible for that person knowing this stuff. We can ask for it, and if they refuse, you got to let it go. And if they do it, then great, but that's their responsibility.
And I'm glad you mentioned the serenity prayer here, Toni, because this chapter is a practical day-by-day application of the serenity prayer. God grant me the courage to change.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and here's the important part, the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes. And so this is the serenity prayer in practice.
Yes, it's huge. And I didn't realize this, but if we took this one chapter and learned it and memorized it and practiced it, we would really solve so many problems in our lives.
Absolutely. So it's a short but important chapter in the book and in life.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And we will be looking at chapter 20, Principles of Making Rules, next time.
Very good.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.